You know, life has a funny way of teaching us lessons we didn't sign up for. One of those lessons comes when someone who ran from love, someone avoidant, someone afraid, starts to feel the weight of what they lost. And here's what it really means. It means their soul has finally caught up to their actions. When they walked away, it wasn't because you weren't enough. It was because they weren't ready to meet the part of themselves that you awakened. You showed them connection. Truth. It matters because it shows the divine law of balance. Every action carries a lesson. Every departure carries revelation. The universe always brings awareness back to the soul that tried to run from its growth. You can't run from love forever. You can't hide from what was meant to teach you. So when the avoidance starts to feel regret, understand. It's not about you getting revenge or validation. It's about you realizing your value was always intact. Their regret is the echo of your energy. It's the universe reminding you that what's pure, what's authentic, what's rooted in love cannot be forgotten. You became their mirror, their teacher, their awakening. But here's the real power move. Don't wait for their apology to set you free. Don't build your peace on someone else's realization. Take their regret as confirmation that you were the lesson, that you were divinely placed in their life to shake their foundation, to show them what it means to feel. Because here's the truth. What? Someone regrets how they left. It's not just nostalgia. It's the beginning of transformation. And maybe, just maybe, it's the first time they're meeting themselves without the armor, without the excuses, without the fear. So bless that regret. Bless that distance. Bless that ending. Because everything that breaks us also builds us. You were not abandoned. You were elevated. You were not rejected. You were redirected toward your power. And if they come back, it's not your job to rescue them. It's your job to stand in your worth and recognize that love doesn't chase, it attracts. The avoidance regret is not your closure. It's your confirmation. Remember this, people who run from love often find themselves running right back into truth. And that truth is you, not because you need them, but because you became the reflection of everything they weren't ready to face. Stand tall, live free, and let their regret remind you, not of what was lost, but of what was found within you. With an avoidant attachment style begins to feel regret. It's often the first real crack in the emotional armor they've spent years constructing. Avoidants build walls, not because they don't feel deeply, but because they feel too deeply and never learned how to handle that flood of emotion safely. They associate closeness with danger, vulnerability with weakness, and love with loss of control. So when they walk away, it isn't from a place of indifference. It's from fear. Fear of being known, fear of being seen, fear of surrendering the illusion of independence that has kept them safe since childhood. But here's what happens when the silence grows too loud. The emotions they suppress begin to rise, and the awakening begins. At first it's subtle. A song, a scent, a memory flashes through their mind and they brush it off. But regret is patient. It doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps in slowly, dissolving the barriers they built between their heart and the truth. It's that ache and chest they can't quite name. It's the sense of unfinished business. It's the moment they scroll through old messages, not because they want to, but because something inside them is searching for a lost piece of themselves. That is the awakening through absence, the recognition that what they tried to escape wasn't a person, but the emotional intimacy that person represented. Avoidants often leave thinking they're finding freedom. They equate space with safety, distance with peace. But real peace doesn't come from running, it comes from integration. So when the quiet becomes unbearable, when solitude no longer feels like a sanctuary but a cage, the realization begins to dawn. The very love they fled was the path to their healing. This is where regret transforms from a passing emotion into a teacher. It forces them to face the internal contradictions that have ruled their relationships. They start to ask themselves, why do I feel empty when I got exactly what I wanted? That question alone marks the start of self-awareness. The awakening through absence is also spiritual in nature. The universe uses separation as a mirror, showing them what they've been unwilling to confront. Every human soul craves connection, because connection is the essence of divine energy. To deny that connection is to deny a part of oneself. The avoidant, in their effort to protect themselves from pain, unknowingly separates from that divine flow. But absence has a way of bringing clarity. In stillness, the noise of defense fades, and what remains is truth. That truth is often uncomfortable. It says, You ran not because they were wrong for you, but because they saw the parts of you you've been avoiding. When regret starts to settle in, the avoidant experiences a collision between their mind and their heart. The mind says, you made the right decision, you're free. But the heart whispers, then why does it still hurt? This internal dissonance is sacred. It's the soul's way of breaking through. Oh, the numbness. The pain of regret becomes the doorway to consciousness. It dismantles pride, softens resistance, and creates space for humility. And that humility is what allows growth to begin. There is a divine purpose in the avoidance regret. It's not meant to punish, but to awaken compassion. For perhaps the first time, they start to see how their behavior affects others. They replay moments where they shut down, remember words they never said, and feel the gravity of emotional distance. That empathy, however faint at first, is the light of healing entering their awareness. They start to feel the loss not just of a partner, but of potential. The potential for deep connection, shared growth, and love unguarded. Regret in the avoidant is a sign that the soul is stirring, that the heart is remembering what it was designed for, connection, not avoidance. It's the slow dismantling of emotional survival mechanisms and the birth of authenticity. The awakening through absence teaches that love is not the threat, it's the medicine. And though they may not know it yet, that first whisper of regret is actually grace. Grace inviting them home to themselves. Regret is a strange teacher. For the avoidant, it often comes as a quiet, insistent echo that grows louder over time, a reflection of the choices they made when fear outweighed desire. The mirror of loss is not merely about missing someone. It is about the profound realization that what they ran from was never truly harmful. What they fled from wasn't a source of pain, but the very experience that could have expanded their soul and healed their heart. Avoidants often leave relationships because they associate closeness with suffocation, vulnerability with weakness, and intimacy with loss of control. Yet when they begin to feel regret, the truth starts to seep through the cracks of their defenses. The love they avoided was not a threat, it was a gift. At first, the mirror of loss manifests subtly. They might notice emptiness in everyday routines, the absence of shared laughter, or the quiet spaces where connection used to exist. These moments, small as they seem, accumulate into a compelling sense of what was lost. Avoidants are not strangers to emotion. They simply compartmentalize it to survive. When regret arrives, it forces them to confront those emotions they carefully ignored or suppressed. Suddenly, they recognize that the freedom they sought was only an illusion. In reality, freedom without connection feels hollow. And isolation, no matter how self-protective, cannot nourish the soul. The mirror of loss also forces an internal reckoning. Avoidants are often masters of rationalization. They leave relationships with a laundry list of reasons why departure was necessary. I need space. I'm not ready. This is too much. These explanations, repeated like mantras, serve as shields against pain. But when regret enters, it begins to strip away those justifications. They start to see the MO. They dismissed, the touch, the conversation, the gaze filled with vulnerability that they avoided. Each memory becomes a reflection of what was real and irreplaceable, and the weight of those reflections creates cognitive dissonance. They thought leaving was protection. They now feel it as loss. This mirror of loss also teaches the avoidant about timing and consequence. Life has a way of showing that the moments we let slip away cannot always be recovered. Avoidants start to realize that leaving a relationship prematurely does not prevent heartbreak. It merely shifts it into a different form. The regret they experience is amplified by the awareness that love, once lost, may not return in the same form. This awakening often brings humility, an unfamiliar companion for those accustomed to guarding themselves. Humility, in this context, is the recognition that self-imposed exile from intimacy is a choice that carries a price. Furthermore, the mirror of loss fosters self-reflection. Avoidants begin to examine their patterns, the repeated avoidance, the emotional walls, the self-protective behaviors. They see not only what they lost, but also what they contributed to their own isolation. In this process, they gain insight into the intricate connection between fear and regret. Every act of avoidance is mirrored back as a lesson in what it truly means to engage, to trust, and to love without restraint. Regret becomes a lens through which they start to perceive the difference between running from love and embracing life's inherent vulnerability. The emotional weight of this realization is transformative. Avoidants often feel shame, not only for leaving, but for misunderstanding what intimacy could have offered them. Yet within this mirror of loss lies the possibility of growth. By confronting their own avoidance and recognizing that the connection they dismissed was a treasure, they are offered an opportunity to evolve emotionally. They begin to understand that intima. Sigh is not danger, it is life's invitation to expand. The regret they feel is not merely sorrow, it is an awakening to the truth that the very thing they feared was the thing they needed most. In the mirror of loss, avoidants see themselves reflected, not as victims or villains, but as humans who have stumbled on the path of love. They glimpse the profound irony of their journey. The fear that drove them away is precisely the fear that their heart longed to transcend. Through regret, they learn that love is not something to flee from, but something to engage with courage and presence. Every ache, every memory, every pang of longing becomes a teacher, guiding them toward the realization that avoidance may have protected them from immediate discomfort, but it could never provide the fulfillment they were seeking. Emotional maturity is often invisible in its early stages, subtle in its growth, and quiet in its lessons. But when it begins to emerge in someone with an avoidant attachment style, it marks a profound transformation. Avoidants have long been conditioned, whether through childhood experiences or personal coping mechanisms, to equate closeness with vulnerability and vulnerability with risk. They build walls, not out of malice but out of necessity, believing that keeping others at a distance preserves their safety and autonomy. Yet emotional maturity is the internal shift that allows them to see the difference between protection and limitation, between freedom and isolation, between avoidance and the opportunity for genuine connection. Regret often acts as the spark that illuminates this shift. For the avoidant, the first steps toward emotional maturity come as subtle awareness. They begin to notice patterns in their relationships, moments when fear dictated their actions instead of intuition or desire. They see how repeatedly withdrawing or shutting down has prevented meaningful bonds from forming. At first, this awareness is uncomfortable. It challenges long-held beliefs and protective strategies, but it is necessary. Emotional maturity requires that a person not only recognize their behaviors, but also understand the underlying motivations and fears that drive them. Regret becomes a mirror, reflecting back the consequences of avoidance and gently nudging them toward insight. This process is deeply humbling. Avoidants often pride themselves on independence, on their ability to navigate life without relying on others. They measure success by self-sufficiency, sometimes to the point of denying the value of emotional intimacy. When regret emerges, it challenges this illusion. They begin to understand that true independence is not isolation, and that real strength lies in the ability to engage with vulnerability without being consumed by it. Emotional maturity, in this context, is the growing recognition that love and connection are not weaknesses, but essential dimensions of a fulfilled life. It's the dawning realization that avoiding intimacy might have protected them from short-term pain, but it also deprived them of profound joy, growth, and shared human experience. As emotional maturity grows, the avoidance starts to differentiate between fear and intuition. They learn to ask themselves, am I running because this is genuinely harmful, or am I running because I'm afraid of feeling? This distinction is crucial. The mature emotional response is not avoidance, it is discernment. It is the ability to face discomfort, engage with challenging emotions, and respond consciously rather than reflexively. Regret is part of this learning process because it forces the avoidant to confront the cost of their choices, to feel the emotional weight of the distance they imposed. Each pang of longing, each reflection on what was lost, becomes an internal teacher, guiding them toward better decision-making in the future. Emotional maturity also manifests as accountability. Avoidants begin to take responsibility for the impact of their acti, rather than externalizing blame onto circumstances or partners. They recognize that leaving abruptly, withdrawing, or emotionally shutting down does not just protect them, it also hurts others. This recognition is painful but necessary. It cultivates empathy, a cornerstone of mature emotional intelligence. Through regret, the avoidant gains insight into the experiences of those they left behind, understanding the ripple effects of their choices. In doing so, They move closer to self-awareness, realizing that growth is as much about considering others' hearts as it is about protecting their own. The journey toward emotional maturity is not linear. Avoidance may oscillate between old patterns and new awareness, between defense mechanisms and vulnerability. Yet the presence of regret signals that progress is occurring. It is the internal acknowledgement that running away is no longer sufficient, that avoidance no longer offers satisfaction, and that true emotional fulfillment requires engagement, courage, and reflection. Regret serves as a teacher, highlighting the difference between instinctual fear and conscious choice, between impulsive withdrawal and mindful participation in life and love. Ultimately, emotional maturity for the avoidant is the evolution from survival-based behaviors to choice-based living. It is the realization that growth, healing, and connection are available when they step beyond fear, embrace discomfort, and honor both their own needs and the needs of others. Regret is not simply a painful memory, it is a catalyst, a divine mechanism that guides the avoidant toward deeper self-understanding, authentic relationships, and the profound joy that comes from learning to engage fully with life rather than running from it. The journey of the avoidant is often characterized by distance, self-protection, and a persistent belief that emotional closeness equals vulnerability or loss of control. Yet when regret begins to take root, it is often through the power of conscious reflection. This is the stage where avoidance no longer shields them, and they are forced to look inward to examine their choices and to recognize the consequences of walking away. Conscious reflection is not merely a fleeting thought or passing doubt. It is a deliberate, often uncomfortable engagement with one's own actions, motives, and emotional patterns. It represents a moment where the avoidant is no longer able to hide behind the illusion of independence or detachment and is confronted with the full reality of what they have lost. At the heart of conscious reflection is awareness. Avoidants are often skilled at compartmentalizing emotion, rationalizing behavior, and distracting themselves from uncomfortable feelings. They leave relationships with reasons that seem practical. I need space, I'm not ready, or this is too much, and often believe they are making a protective choice. But regret arrives when the mind and heart begin to realign. In moments of stillness, in the quiet of night, or through repeated memories, they begin to see the patterns of their avoidance for what they are. They realize that the freedom they sought by leaving was never complete, that distance has not brought peace, but emptiness, and that the very connection they feared was actually what they needed most. Conscious reflection forces them to replay the relationship in detail, examining not just actions but intentions and missed opportunities. They think about the conversations they avoided, the moments of vulnerability they refused, and the ways in which their fear dictated behavior. Each recollection acts as a mirror, reflecting not only their own actions but also the reality of the love and commitment they walked away from. This process is often painful because avoidance once served as a shield against feeling deeply. Now, the shield is gone, and they are left face to face with the emotional consequences of their choices. This reflection is not designed to punish them, but to awaken understanding, insight, and ultimately growth. Through conscious reflection, the avoidant also begins to recognize the disparity between perception and reality. They may have believed that closeness meant losing themselves, but now they see that true intimacy is not about surrendering identity, it is about sharing it. They realize that leaving did not protect them from vulnerability, it merely postponed the inevitable confrontation with their own emotions. They see the small moments they dismissed, the quiet gestures, the offers of support, the love that was present in the everyday routines, and recognize how each instance was a gift they failed to receive fully. This recognition creates a subtle but powerful internal shift. They start to understand that avoidance is not strength but limitation, and the real power lies in conscious choice rather than reflexive flight. Regret coupled with conscious reflection also cultivates empathy. As avoidants replay interactions in their mind, they begin to imagine the experience of the person they left behind. They feel, for the first time in a vivid way, the weight of absence, the confusion, the pain, and the longing they caused. This is a crucial step in emotional evolution, the recognition that their actions have real impact on others. Avoidants are often accused of being cold or detached, but conscious reflection teaches them that detachment is a learned survival mechanism, not a permanent identity. Through the lens of regret, they gain insight into the human consequences of avoidance and begin to see themselves not just as individuals navigating fear, but as participants in a shared emotional ecosystem. The power of conscious reflection is that it transforms regret from passive sorrow into active awareness. It allows the avoidant to break the cycle of repetition, to recognize the internal and external patterns that led to separation, and to confront the fears that drove them away. This action fosters accountability, humility, and self-understanding, all of which are critical components of emotional growth. Avoidance may still struggle with intimacy, but conscious reflection plants the seeds for authentic engagement, for the possibility that one day they can approach connection with awareness rather than instinctive withdrawal. Ultimately, conscious reflection serves as both a mirror and a teacher. It illuminates the ways in which avoidance limited their capacity to experience love, while also providing insight into the growth that is possible when they face fear instead of fleeing from it. Regret, when paired with deliberate reflection, becomes transformative rather than paralyzing. It is the moment when the avoidant begins to recognize that running away was never the answer, and that true freedom is found not in isolation, but in the courage to face themselves, their choices, and the love they once abandoned. Regret is not a punishment, it is an invitation. For avoidant, this truth often arrives slowly, like a quiet knock on the door of the soul that cannot be ignored. When they begin to feel remorse for the way they left, it is rarely just about missing someone. It is about recognizing the broader consequences of their choices and the opportunity for transformation embedded within that awareness. Avoidance is often a survival strategy, a way to manage overwhelming emotions and protect oneself from perceived threats. Yet regret pierces that protection, revealing that avoidance may shield them from discomfort but cannot prevent growth, learning, or healing. This is the moment where the universe provides a second chance, not necessarily to undo the past, but to rewrite the internal narrative that governs their future. The avoidance regret often starts with reflection, a replaying of moments, conversations, and decisions. They recall what was lost, not just in material terms, but in emotional depth. The shared laughter, the small gestures of or the intimacy that could have flourished had they stayed present. In this reflection, the seeds of redemption are planted. They begin to see that leaving did not erase connection. It merely postponed the awareness of what was truly valuable. This recognition awakens something essential, the understanding that avoidance does not equate to invulnerability. True strength lies not in fleeing from love, but in confronting it with courage, honesty, and self-awareness. Regret as a call for redemption is deeply transformative because it prompts the avoidant to examine the self they left behind in the mirror of the other. They see the ways in which fear dictated their behavior, the ways in which they pushed love away to maintain a semblance of safety, and the unintended pain their actions caused. This is not about guilt, it is about clarity. Redemption begins when they stop defending their past actions and instead accept them as lessons. The avoidant realizes that their behavior was never inherently wrong, it was a reflection of unhealed fear. With this awareness comes the potential for evolution, the chance to choose differently, to respond to life and love with consciousness rather than compulsion. What makes this moment of redemption particularly powerful is that it is voluntary. The avoidant cannot force themselves to grow. They can only recognize the invitation that regret presents and decide to accept it. This voluntary engagement with one's own shadow, the patterns, fears, and avoidance strategies, is the essence of emotional and spiritual maturity. It is the difference between repeating old cycles unconsciously and stepping into deliberate conscious evolution. Regret becomes a teacher rather than a tormentor, guiding them towards self-reflection, accountability, and ultimately transformation. Another dimension of this redemption is the realization that their past behavior need not define their future. The avoidant comes to understand that avoidance is a pattern, not a permanent state. Regret allows them to see the consequences of their actions in vivid relief, and in that seeing, they find the freedom to choose differently. They may never have control over every outcome, nor can they erase the hurt caused, but they can control how they respond moving forward. Redemption lies not in apology alone, but in conscious change, in the willingness to face fear, and in the commitment to integrate emotional depth into their relationships. This call to evolve is also a spiritual principle. Life often presents the same lessons repeatedly until we are willing to confront them with awareness. The avoidance regret signals that the lesson of connection, intimacy, and vulnerability is being revisited. It is an opportunity to transcend avoidance, to step beyond reflexive self-protection, and to embrace the fullness of emotional experience. By engaging with regret consciously, the avoidant begins to cultivate empathy, compassion, and understanding, both for themselves and for those they affected. This process of redemption is not linear. It is often filled with hesitation, doubt, and self-questioning. But even in its struggle, it is a powerful force for transformation. Ultimately, the avoidance regret is a divine invitation to evolve. It is the first step toward reclaiming the parts of themselves they abandoned. The first recognition that avoidance cannot satisfy the soul's longing for connection. In embracing this invitation, they begin a journey not toward external validation, but toward internal integrity, emotional maturity, and authentic engagement with life and love. Regret, when met with awareness, becomes the bridge between what was lost and what can be gained, offering the possibility of redemption, growth, and profound transformation. Transformation is often born from the tension between fear and longing, between what we thought we needed and what we truly desire. For the avoidant, regret serves as the catalyst that bridges this. It is the emotional signal that something essential was left behind, that the self-protective mechanisms which once seemed necessary are now limiting. Avoidants often leave relationships not out of lack of feeling, but out of fear of vulnerability, of being overwhelmed, or of losing control. Yet, when regret arrives, it illuminates the inherent truth that running from connection cannot fulfill the soul. Transformation begins the moment they recognize that the very thing they fled, emotional intimacy, is precisely what can lead them to wholeness. Regret is rarely comfortable. It arrives as a weight, a persistent reminder of what has been lost, of opportunities missed, and of the love that was surrendered. The avoidant initially resists this discomfort, often rationalizing their departure, downplaying the significance of the relationship, or convincing themselves that independence equates to fulfillment. But transformation cannot occur without facing the truth. Regret forces the avoidant to stop, to reflect, and to acknowledge the emotional consequences of avoidance. In this pause, there is a subtle yet profound shift. They begin to see that fear-driven decisions created a gap between themselves and authentic experience, a gap that no amount of self-protection can bridge. The path of transformation is also a journey of self-reconciliation. Avoidants are often divided internally, torn between the desire for closeness and the impulse to flee. Regret brings these conflicting parts into awareness. It reveals the irony of their journey. They left in pursuit of freedom, yet freedom without connection feels hollow and isolating. Transformation occurs when they begin to integrate these fractured parts, acknowledging both the fear and the longing, the desire to protect themselves and the yearning to belong. This integration is the essence of maturity. It allows them to act from awareness rather than compulsion and to respond to love with both courage and discernment. Through this process, avoidants also begin to cultivate emotional courage. Regret is painful precisely because it confronts them with the depth of what they avoided. It is not enough to intellectually understand loss. Transformation requires feeling it fully. As they engage with their emotions, they discover that vulnerability is not a threat but a pathway. Each pang of longing, each flash of memory, and each acknowledgement of absence becomes a teacher, showing them that real strength lies in openness, presence, and honesty. In this way, regret shifts from being a source of shame or despair to a tool for growth. Transformation also involves accountability and conscious choice. The avoidant learns that while the past cannot be changed, the future can be shaped. They begin to recognize patterns, to see where avoidance has limited them, and to make intentional decisions that honor both themselves and others. This is the moment when regret becomes sacred. It is no longer merely a reminder of LOSS, but a guide, showing them how to live differently, how to love more fully, and how to embrace connection without fear. Through this lens, every past action, every misstep, and every withdrawal becomes a lesson in emotional evolution. Another key aspect of this transformation is the development of empathy. As they reflect on the pain caused by avoidance, avoidants often experience a profound shift in perspective. They begin to feel the emotional impact of their choices on others, not in a way that fosters guilt, but in a way that cultivates compassion. This awareness deepens their capacity for authentic connection, allowing them to engage in relationships with sensitivity and presence rather than reflexive defense. Regret, when embraced consciously, becomes the teacher that leads to the heart's expansion. Ultimately, transformation for the avoidant is the emergence of authenticity. It is the alignment of fear and desire, of mind and heart, of past mistakes with present growth. Regret signals the soul's readiness to evolve, to move beyond avoidance, and to step into a life where connection is not a threat, but a source of fulfillment, courage, and purpose. It is the awakening that allows them to embrace love fully, to live consciously, and to transform every loss into wisdom, every absence into insight, and every regret into the catalyst for profound personal and emotional growth. Thank you for sharing your time and energy with me. Wishing you clarity, courage, and joy on your journey ahead. Goodbye, and may every step you take lead you closer to your purpose and fulfillment.